Okay, here we are, Hiko Simon, here in Tokyo tonight, as of this week now, officially every Sunday at 10:30 p.m. How's it going, everyone? Hope you're good. Good to see you all, and this is going to be the recorded portion. Nice of you to start rolling in. I've been taking comments for the last about 10 minutes or so. But what's been going on in Japan this week, and what are some topics you want to know about? The main news going on this week has, of course, been the main two topics dominating. One is China's escalation of its territorial claims on islands that have been controlled by Japan and pretty much without issue for the last 120 years. But now they're getting kind of serious with this air defense zone. And the other one has been the secrets law, which Japan has been implementing basically in order to be able to share intelligence with foreign governments. Very interesting tonight, actually. The Secretary General of the LDP, what's his name? Shigeru. I don't know his first name, but Ishiba. He actually published a blog yesterday saying that the tens of thousands of protesters, there's been a huge protest movement against this because the law doesn't define what a secret is. And there's this idea that the government could theoretically censor anything it just finds inconvenient. And there have been a lot of protests all around Parliament and around where the Prime Minister lives and so on. And, there's been a lot of outrage against this law. And he actually, on his blog, suggested that what they're doing is really constructively the same as terrorism. And I don't know, it's one of those things. A lot of people talk about how, here Japan's finally doing it. They're on the road to becoming a militarist fascist state again. Look at Abe, look at his historical views, look at how right-wing the LDP is. And whenever someone says that to me, I say, well, yeah, sure, I'm not defending the LDP. They're not my bag of fish, in the end of the day. But they've been there for 50 years. They've been as right-wing and as crazy the entire time. And, they're not... You can't go talking crazy like, it's going to happen now. And it happens with foreigners who have been here a short time. It's like, this is the time that they're going to go and become the militarist. And it's particularly a view, I think, in China and Korea. They're educated to believe that Japan is ready to leap out and become militarist and fascist again at any point. And I always say, look, just don't talk crazy talk. It's like people talking about how Obama's going to make America, communist or something like that. It's just people don't like him, and they look at what direction he leans in, and they take it to that logical extreme. And I always say, don't talk crazy talk about Japan. Look at it in context. But I must admit, they don't help themselves when they go talking normal, peaceful, civilized protest against a badly written law, calling them terrorists. But that is what it is. I mean, again, this is the LDP. So that's been the interesting news on that lately. The China stuff, the Air Force there is getting a little bit hyper because apparently some people are speculating here maybe the Navy, they're feeling a bit left out with the Navy catching all the attention recently and not getting much done. Thank you for the feedback. It's always good to know that you're watchable. And by the way, I don't usually say this actually, but I'm gonna say this every time on this because this is my show, and the more participation, the better. Tweet if you enjoy this. It's all about this is my interaction show. This is my show to talk to you guys. So get me the interaction. Tweet, like, tell people that you're watching this and it's worth watching. Get a crowd and we can get talking. But there's a good number of people here. So first thing officially I want to talk about is Michael Peckitt's article in the Japan Times. Good on the Japan Times. Big thumbs up to Japan Times. I recently took them out of my RSS feed. I'm sorry about that. I might put them back. I have my ups and downs with the Japan Times, but they're on and up at the moment because they selected a good guy who wrote a really, really good piece on his experience as a cerebral palsy sufferer, as a disabled person moving from the UK to Japan. And the sense of liberation that he found in being a foreigner, in exactly the same way that many foreigners find extremely annoying, actually. But being identified not primarily as a disabled person like he is in the UK, but as a foreigner first, the liberation he kind of found in that. It's kind of interesting. It's a different perspective on the old, much flogged dead horse of foreigners standing out in Japan. It's a nice new angle on it, and I thought it was very thoughtfully written, so good job on that. Ramzi Berabia has suggested fashion in Japan as a topic. Well, I'm like the worst person. If my wife ever found out that I was even engaging in this topic. What I like it, well, again, I've said this many times. For a start, I know Tokyo more than I know Japan. Tokyo is amazing because it is a city of, lately BBC, it's hard to quote the number of how many people there are because, Greater Tokyo, Tokyo theoretically extends all the way to Osaka. If you go along the bullet train line, there's no countryside anywhere along that way. It's all connected together as one big city. So where you draw the line of what you can consider to be Greater Tokyo is kind of hard. I always say 25 million for what the general greater population Tokyo is. I heard the BBC say 35 million the other day. That sounds like a bit of an exaggeration to me, but certainly if that's what it is, there's something between 25 and 35 million people who all come into the center of a geographically very small, very compact city every day. And what that means is when you have that and there is economic disparity, but not that extreme, not like in other countries, and you don't have the kind of ethnic neighborhoods and whatever. It means that you find Tokyo breaks up into these kind of neighborhoods based on human interest, on hobbies, on age groups, demographics, fashion styles. There are actual towns for specific fashion styles. That people who dress a certain way will go to this town and not go to that town. People of us not go here. People who are into certain hobbies will always go to this area to go and spend their free time. It's to the world they organize around interests. And what's cool about fashion, of course, is that there you can find anything. The other thing I really like about Japan is that, I don't know, generally speaking, fashion in New Zealand and Australia, and my experience of it in Western countries as a university student, fashion's meant to be like it's very attached to a statement of what sort of an individual you are. And that's cool, but it creates an interesting thing that, if you ever show up at a party and you're wearing the same thing as someone else, that's like, and I've had this, I've been to a party and someone else was wearing the same jacket as me, and I never wore the jacket again. And I know other people, the other guy probably stopped doing it as well, because somehow, you don't want to be seen to be doing the same thing as anyone else. And one thing I like about Japan, and it's the same with music and a lot of other things, it's like there isn't this kind of it's okay if you like it, if you like your jacket, if you like that cheesy music, you can have a bunch of hard rock music and still like and publicly not be embarrassed going out buying a children's tune that becomes a number one song, or a classical tune that becomes a number one song. There's no self-consciousness, which really, when you think about it, it comes down to posing, being a real poser. That you don't want to be seen to be a certain way. And I don't know, in Japan, I guess there's enough of a mass of people. Also culturally, there isn't this huge imperative to be a unique individual. It's actually kind of seen as being comforting to be in a group of people with like-minded people, so people don't mind actually dressing the same. I came to Japan first during the 80s, during the bodycon craze, which was just a certain style that women would grow their hair long, wear very short mini skirts, wear long leather boots and stuff like that. Best fashion boom ever. And it was very confusing to me because everywhere I went it looked great, but everyone was the same with it. I didn't really know how to deal with that at first, but in Japan, it's okay for everyone to, for large groups of people to follow the same thing. And at the end of the day, that's it. People seem to be less worried about how they're perceived. And that extends into fashion. And it means both it's okay to wear what's popular, what you see in a magazine. And of course, this makes it very powerful. There are certain magazines which follow certain fashion trends, and people know if they like this style, they'll buy a magazine which promotes a certain style, and they'll just buy whatever is in that magazine. So for the clothes makers to get your clothes into those magazines that back your style, you're automatically going to sell a whole bunch of stuff, and that's a very powerful driver of the fashion industry in Japan. But at the same time, you can just go, you know where the shops are, where that style is. It's super cool as well how, like, in terms of the stuff that I always liked, I'm getting a bit beyond that now, but I always used to like living near Shimokitazawa, which is like a big university town. There's a lot of students who just have like a lot of used clothes shops or thrift shops, stuff like that. And people who design clothes on the side with that as a hobby or whatever. And, it's all done in a very non-poserish, just, nice way about it. And I think that's cool. Of course, you've got the famous things. You got the maids in Akihabara and the Lolita goths and whatever in Harajuku, and I probably mislabeled that. I'm going to get in trouble for that, but whatever. I know that they like actually purchase the patterns and they make a lot of those clothes themselves, but all of that's cool as well. It's all about the hobbies. So that's, I think, I don't know, without being an expert on specific fashions and stuff like that, it's kind of nice that just there's not the huge social pressure and hang-ups and self-awareness and poserish stuff that I remember from New Zealand and Australia. I never felt that in Japan. Being a gaijin might be part of that, but I think it's just different. It's kind of cool. They got everything. So I just talked. How long did I just talk about fashion? That's like the longest you're ever going to hear me say. I'm probably not going to repeat that again. So my Argonauts, Jason just mentioned that Chris Gam, not action TV, street English TV, waving hands. I actually do kickboxing at a gym that he managed. He's not managing it anymore, but I thought it was awesome that he was a gym manager. It was like a perfect job for him. He was apparently on NHK on Cool Japan recently. I would love to see that. I hope I can find something of it online. If I can, if someone can find it, please send me the link. I'll post it below, as I will also post a link to Michael Peckitt's article in the Japan Times. I'll see if I can find it myself, but I think that's awesome. The Cool Japan thing is cool. This whole idea that, cool is it's a delicate, it's like a snowflake, It exists and it's nice and it's there so long as you do nothing about it, but the moment you try to catch it and hold it, it melts. And Japanese culture has kind of been cool on its own as an underground thing, and that's been kind of nice. The whole fact that the anime thing and that there have been these, anime is becoming huge in France, and kind of the manga and different Japanese kind of subcultures. Its music and its indies music scene is kind of quietly appreciated. The horror music scene, movie scene is very appreciated. It's all happened without any deliberate marketing by the companies that produce the content or the Japanese government. And someone in the Japanese government seems to have picked it up, and now they're like, the government is actively promoting all of the stuff which is becoming cool abroad. And that's cool. And, they put Danny Chu onto a committee and the culture ministry and all this sort of stuff. But now that they're actually defining what is cool, they're defining anime, they're defining the moe culture that, Danny Chu pushes as government-sponsored cool. I don't know. Is something still cool if it's government-sponsored? I'm a little bit concerned that if it's something which all of a sudden you're trying too hard to do, it's going to lose its coolness. But they got Chris Gen, they've got Danny Chu, they've got lots of people, and I'm always glad to see Japan getting promoted in a positive light. I just hope that they don't turn all the cool stuff into not cool, and indeed I hope they kind of don't promote all of the too much of the stuff that I don't think is cool. But we'll see. Question from Michael Peckitt. By the way, these are old questions by now, and I should be keeping up better, so I'm going to try to catch up. But question from Michael Peckitt. How do I feel about Japanese lawmakers writing history textbooks? And what about the US airline flight plans? I'll talk for a minute about the... and you know what? This is worth updating the bottom line here for the textbooks. Joint textbook news. I'm going to be guilty of being a little bit cynical about this, but there have been numerous attempts by academics in Japan, China, and Korea to create a joint history textbook. This is something which happens in Europe with Germany and France, and it's one of the ways that they kind of arguably have gotten past the historical issues by having a common agreed narrative of history, particularly around, of course, World War II and the issues that divide those countries the most. And of course, there's a worldwide perception. Japan just has these terrible denial revisionist textbooks that show that the government isn't sorry for what it did, and the victim countries, are very worried about this, and they want to make sure Japan has proper textbooks. At the same time, when you learn a little bit about the textbook system, however, you have to remember in China and in South Korea, even democratic South Korea, history textbooks are written by and provided to schools, and they're prescribed by the government. They're directly provided by the government. The history narrative is decided almost as a matter of government history, as government policy. And as naturally happens when you do that, there is a propaganda aspect to that. There is a your own history in a positive light, showing other countries as bad guys and whatever. And there's a promotion of patriotism aspect to history teaching, which you would expect would also be present in Japan, just like the other two countries. But in fact, one thing that MacArthur did when GHQ took over Japan after World War II was they recognized the way that the education system in Japan, and of course the Japanese education system was used in Taiwan and Korea as well, was used to promote a single view of history and this kind of Japanese kind of patriotism, which drove Japan, was seen as promoting Japanese militarism. And so he put in a new system whereby the government could no longer impose history textbooks on anybody. It was up to local school boards could decide whatever history textbook that they wanted. The only requirement was that there was a quality check on the history textbooks, which was that they had to go through a Japanese government check, and the rules by which the government could check the textbooks was very it was set out in a way that it made it impossible for people, for basically the government to censor or to promote a certain view of history anymore. So what they did was they made it impossible to use history for propaganda in Japan, and which is the exact opposite of what I know a lot of people think happens in Japan based on the news. And so it means that, and that doesn't mean that there wasn't some manipulation. For example, there was a guy called Ienaga Saburo who had a history textbook, a very left-wing history textbook, which is very forthcoming with views about the Nanking massacre and Unit 731 in Manchuria that performed live vivisections and medical experiments on live prisoners. And he put all that there, and these were topics which were considered controversial and basically were denied by the far right and still are by many right-wing politicians in Japan. And the history textbook vetters ordered rewrites of passages on those parts, saying that they were not, to either have them deleted or have them not say that they were controversial and they were not confirmed as actually having had happened. And the Supreme Court of Japan, granted it took 20 years for this to happen, sided with the author and said, no, the textbook process cannot make him delete these things. These are undeniable events of history. So in the end of the day, the process kind of worked in the end of the day. Well, what MacArthur wanted, a depoliticized history textbook process that defended the right of people to make left-wing or right-wing textbooks, survived. Whenever any right-wing textbook comes through, they're not government-sponsored per se. They do survive the textbook review process. But there was a textbook a few years ago that was only used in one school. I think it's been used in a few more than that since, but it was a very kind of a positive kind of, what would you call it, this upset a lot of Korean academics when they found out that this book had been approved, and a lot of protests and so on against Japan. I think everyone was under the belief that the Japanese government wrote this textbook and was rolling it out in all schools, and that wasn't the case. Under Japan's textbook law, so long as they stick to true facts and they don't actually say anything factually wrong, they can say whatever they want, and it's up to the school boards to decide what they do. So it's actually quite a good system. And even beyond that, I think there was a survey done recently by a US university that got some publication in Japan. They surveyed history textbooks throughout Asia and put them on a nationalism rating scale, and Japanese history textbooks were found to be the least nationalist in all of Asia. So when Korean politicians, who are clearly lobbying, they're campaigning to impose on Japan their view of history, and that's kind of, they say, we want to have a say in what Japanese history textbooks say. That's what they're thinking, and but whenever they've tried to actually write a joint history textbook, it's always collapsed, and it's collapsed not because of Japan insisting on denying certain things. It's just impossible to get Korea and China to take nationalism out of their own history textbooks and to take that propaganda aspect out, which isn't in the present Japanese process, is very difficult for them. And so once again this week they agreed, Korea and Japan agreed to look into once again trying to write a joint history textbook between the two governments. And that'll be very interesting. This thing always falls apart because frankly, to the other guys, they can't put their own nationalism aside. So it'll be interesting. It's not Japan. That's the problem. And this is the thing. If you really want to study all sides of history, you can actually do it much better in Japan than you can in Korea and China. That's a fact. History is not politicized. It's not as politicized. It's not considered to be as sensitive. And certainly, you can get anything from far left, anti-monarchy, all the way to extreme right. All sorts of views exist here, and they're there if you want to find them. The main problem with Japan's education system is simply that it doesn't foster interest in history, because you have this mass education system, which encourages rote learning, and frankly, that it spends so much time on the earlier periods of history, it barely makes it up until the modern period. And students are completely uninterested by the time they get up, just because it's such a mind-numbing way of teaching. And so, this is where you end up with students who they meet Chinese and Koreans, outside of Japan, and they don't understand anything about why they're so passionate, or, and they've never really registered half the stuff because it goes in one ear and out the other, and they barely touch on the modern history aspects. So it's a crappy education system, to be sure, but it's not in the same way that a lot of people think that it is. I think the joint history textbook initiative it's a great idea, if only partly because it'll once again show that Japan isn't quite as bad as it's made out. But this is why it doesn't work, because Japan doesn't play to the script. It's supposed to, want to deny war crimes and all this sort of stuff, which isn't necessarily the way it's going to happen, but it'll be good. Gamer, yeah, hey, I'm way too late for this. let me skip down and catch up on some comments, but the textbook thing is an interesting topic. Akito Tengan, quick question about, are there any security jobs in Japan? Yeah, I know lots of foreign, well, not lots, I know a few foreigners who have worked in security. I mean, I don't know what kind of security you mean. If you mean like a security guard company, companies like Secom, a few like that, like conglomerate-sized companies that handle corporate security, I haven't seen or heard of many foreigners in those, and I suspect for those kind of registered, like, carrying like bank bag companies, I suspect they have pretty tough requirements and background checks and stuff like that. Of course, they do need to check that they're very thoroughly to see if the employees have any kind of organized crime links or background, and I'm guessing that there may be citizenship requirements with that, I'm not sure, but certainly in terms of like bouncers. Not that most nightclubs in Japan really don't need bouncers. It's funny, you can have bars here crowded full of people drunk and not have big issues with fights. That said, Roppongi will generally have door people, and I guess there generally are security people, and a lot of foreigners do that, but I don't know about that. Yeah. And interesting, by the way, to see from Michael Peckitt. By the way, I am way behind, but talking about Ben Stubbing's own background, and it's probably good to see that that's probably influenced how you have become, how you were able to get such a good piece in one, into the Japan Times. I guess the comments haven't been updating, so I'm going to refresh my stream to see if I can see some more comments. But if you've got more topics for me, let me know. Oh, and see, YouTube comments, they don't update. Kerfuffle, by the way, I like the word kerfuffle. I guess you've noticed that my Agnout sounds like he's going to take a drink every time that I say it. I'm going to say it over and over because it is an awesome word. So yes, Ramsey Berabia says, what's the best way to get a university job? Wants to do a postgraduate degree in finance, but you're talking about a post, so university jobs. Boom. I don't know. I know that postgrad is pretty open to foreign students in Japan, and in fact they're facilitating that now by making the Japanese academic year match that of most Western academic years. It's always been a bit out of sync, and they're deliberately trying to foster. There is an actual problem that there is a declining number of students in Japan with a declining population, and it's meaning that a lot of universities are struggling to keep numbers, which they need to keep funding, and encouraging foreign students to come in is one way that they're doing that. And it goes both ways. It's partly to facilitate Japanese students going and studying abroad, because there's a sense of crisis around a huge decline in the number of Japanese who are even showing an interest in studying abroad now, and at the same time trying to increase the numbers of foreign students. So in terms of studying, I believe it's getting relatively easy, and I think getting your postgraduate degree in finance, if you're interested in coming to Japan for that, to study, that would be cool, I think. But in terms of a job at a university, I'm not sure. So by the way, Ramsey, the reason I can pronounce your name relatively well is I majored in Spanish. So I like the double R's. It's kind of cool. I don't know about jobs at universities. I know that there's one or two famous people. Certainly there's Debito Arudo is one guy. Has an academic job, or at least last that I heard. In fact, no, I know a few people, friends who have parents who have lived here for a long time who are academics, but I don't know how you get into that. I mean, I think it's the same sort of gig as anywhere else. It's a bit of a black box, but there you go. HD Unplugged, this is very, very late, but thank you for the Tokyo hosts 33 million at 160 million every day. Tokyo is Japan. Two things on that. One, Japanese population is 120 million, not 160 million. But 33 million clicks with what the BBC was saying. Tokyo is Japan, but Tokyo is also different to Japan in the sense that Tokyo is its own kind of microcosm. There are a lot of cultural phenomena that take place in Tokyo that don't occur elsewhere in Japan, even in other big cities like Osaka or Nagoya, just because Tokyo is such a huge mass of people. And I would say that the experience of Japanese culture that you have in Tokyo is very different to what you would experience in any rural part of Japan, or even in the next tier of cities like Fukuoka or Sendai or Sapporo. And this is why, for people who want to come and learn about Japan, there's two, I would say, I would encourage people not to come to Tokyo first. But that said, for living in Japan, I couldn't live anywhere other than Tokyo, so it's important to distinguish Tokyo within Japan, I think, in terms of when I talk about what's normal in Japan, I can talk about what's normal in Tokyo, but I also have to remember it's not necessarily what's normal for the rest of Japan. But yes, Michael Peckitt mentioning that when you leave Tachikawa, you are not in the city, but you are in Tokyo. Well, there are some rural areas around Tachikawa. I know it well. I used to live in Hachioji. And certainly you can actually get mountains and national parks and stuff out in Takao. But, people commute into Tokyo all the way from Otsuki and Yamanashi, which is like another 30-40 minutes further west from there. So, yeah. This is how late I am on the comments, because Akito Tengan is talking about how yoga pants are still the world's best invention, which I think MC Hammer proved that definitively. Pretty much. So, do the Japanese like Western comics in the way that West's like anime? I don't know. Well, I'm not the right person to ask, because I'm not an anime or manga person to begin with. I guess the thing is that there's such a whole entire world of manga here. There's a lot of people who probably don't know a lot, and there's no need. They don't feel a need to know about Western comics. There again, I guess probably those who are interested do, but I'm afraid I don't know. HT Unplugged asking recommendations for lesser known places that would take a nice date. He found Masa Cafe Las House years ago, but coming back soon would like to find a nice place to go. I assume you're talking in Tokyo. A nice place to take a date. I haven't taken a date in a while now, but in terms of a nice place to go, I would say Nakameguro. Around the canals there's a lot of nice little cafes and bars around there. Pardon me, I just have to actually blow my nose. Give me a second. Oh, this is actually one thing I never mentioned. I get hay fever this time of year, which I don't get it in spring, but I get it in autumn, which is a pain. Apologies for that. Nakameguro is nice. I would say Kagurazaka is very nice. It's very classy. It's central. It's Shitamachi. It's the old town, but it's classy. It's a little bit well-to-do, and there's lots of good little restaurants and cafes. I'd say those two places for a central Tokyo kind of simple day. Michael Peckitt talking about there's virtually no patriotism in the UK class. The British Empire is discussed, but no, it's not as good or bad, just what happened, which is a bit of a shame. And it's been I've heard it's been a topic, obviously, in UK politics recently, in conservative politics, the idea of bringing back an idea of British identity, and how British identity's kind of been a little bit suppressed as being kind of politically incorrect and insensitive to the very large number of minorities in Britain. I actually have a great textbook. I have this, which is based on a turn of the 20th century textbook. This is written by by people from the satirical magazine Punch in that time, and it's from the days when intelligent wit was still allowed, and it's actually centered around the idea of every event in history being able to be summarized as being a good thing or a bad thing, or connected to the fact of Britain being top nation. It's fantastic, I mean, I love the whole. Honestly, and the thing, something like this is actually it's motivating for learning history, because it's all a slightly twisted, slightly off version of history. Some of it, you have to really know the history to really get all the jokes, but it's nice. It's humor which is aimed above your head and challenges you to know the history to get the joke. It actually makes you want to go and learn the real history, so that you get all the jokes. This is one of my favorite books ever, actually. So yes, I mean, I'm actually all for old-fashioned. I went to an old-fashioned grammar school. I think I was taught a very well. New Zealand definitely does not have patriotism is very low generally in New Zealand, and I think the view of history teaching has become very I think it's a good thing that New Zealand's coming to terms with the fact it's got some very dark history, in fact, which it hasn't really been very honest with itself about. Just in terms of how it stole a lot of land from the Maoris. We've always had a view of ourselves as having been very nice to the Maoris, when the Australians and the Americans and everyone else wasn't. We've always had this idea that we've been very good to the Pacific Islands, which, yeah, we kind of were, but we also managed to actually almost wipe out most of the population of Samoa in 2 weeks through, if not deliberate inaction, certainly through gross negligence, through allowing the Spanish flu there and doing nothing about it. We've done a lot of bad things, so we learn about that, and that's all very cool. I love history. It's one of my favorite subjects in school. And I don't know, I think it's okay to have a bit of there's nothing wrong with a little bit of patriotism or nationalism mixed in, so long as it's there in a way that doesn't. So long as you have access to all the different views, and the views are all put out there, I think it helps. It makes it more interesting to have it presented with a perspective. So long as it's not prescribed as the first and final truth, and that's the issue I have with a lot of dictatorships, where I know that history is presented as a single kind of almost morality. Should never be that. Everything about history should always be questionable. But at the same time, I think it's great to have a narrative, and I think it's good to have a cultural identity. I don't think the Brits have anything to be embarrassed about that. Britain's got plenty to be proud of, and plenty to also be ashamed of, frankly. And a lot of Brits nowadays don't seem to realise much of either, which is kind of a shame. There is a funny thing with again, when I'm trying to be argumentative, I'll sometimes point out, the Japanese Empire has a lot in common with the British Empire, and Brits immediately take offence at that, because there's a common education about the Japanese Empire as being this purely brutal, uncivilized kind of thing which came in and usurped them from Malaysia. Malaysia, where everyone loved the British, they came in and they did all of these very, very terrible things. Japan did do many, many terrible things in Malaysia, but that doesn't mean that Britain didn't also do many, many terrible things in India, Malaysia, and Burma. So much so that the Japanese weren't welcomed by many parts of the population there, just as the British were welcomed by many parts of the population when they came back. Everyone likes to say that we were popular and they were bad. Nobody likes to give a nuanced view of that type of history. But both sides exist, and both sides, I think, should be taught and understood. Japan had a lot of support from the ethnic partisans, the Malays, the Javans, the majorities who had been suppressed by the British. And the British, controlled their colonies by using minorities, mainly Chinese, as a leverage to control these, and to make the Chinese objects of hate within those countries that they controlled. That was kind of a very deliberate literally divide and conquer, divide and rule was the British strategy in those colonies, and it was set up to be an ethnic genocidal time bomb for those minorities, which Japan was very easily able to trigger when it came in. I mean, there was a lot of bad stuff which happened, but it was set up to be that way by the British, and it's happened all over the British Empire. It's fascinating stuff. I love all that stuff. Michael Peckitt, your wife did not know that Japan invaded Korea until she went to Australia. That's interesting, because Japan did invade Korea twice technically. Once way back in the 16th century, and certainly even if they didn't get to the modern history bit, they would have gotten to the old history bit. So that's a little bit surprising. The modern history bit is where it does get interesting, and again, there are different. Of course, the standard narrative in Korea is that Japan, Korea was aggressively invaded, and annexed. But again, it's an interesting thing to read about. It was a very gradual process. The annexation of Korea, it took place over 6 or 7 years. It took place during a period of huge political instability within Korea, during which there were domestic factions, political factions within Korea. Some aligned with Russia, some aligned with China. The old factions were aligned with China, and some aligned with Japan. And with the collapse of China and the power of the China-aligned factions, there was a domestic competition between the Russian-favored factions and the Japan-friendly factions. And Japan basically provided a lot of support. Basically elbowing into the country and eventually kind of, directly militarily assisting the pro-Japan factions. And it's actually like the term pro-Japanese even now is associated with, like in France, being a collaborator. And it's a really dirty term to apply to someone now. But what's interesting in Korean politics is every time some politicians campaign to dig up all the old records and find out, whose grandfathers were Japan collaborators who were from the pro-Japan factions, they find out that all their own family members were. So it's a complicated thing. Not unlike Nazism in France. France was invaded by the Nazis, but it doesn't mean that a lot of French didn't support and continue to support even after the war. The union with Germany, and this is part of what I think facilitated the EU happening so quickly after World War II. Was that there are a lot of French people who didn't see it all as entirely a bad thing. Of course, I don't think anyone can see anything like the EU happening between Japan and Korea, so happening even now. I don't think it's necessarily because Germany apologized and changed all its textbooks and showed how truly sorry it was. That's part of it, but it's also because frankly, this whole idea that Germany was tainted forever, in the same way that Japan has been tainted forever with Korea, didn't happen. There were a lot of people who, being a collaborator was still a kind of a dirty word for French people, but it really is still very much more so that today in Korea, which is interesting. It was no question. I mean, in the end of the day, Koreans have made it clear that they were not happy being annexed by Japan, and in that respect, I guess it wasn't an invasion, but it wasn't a simple invasion like you might imagine. One day it's Korea, and the next day Japan lands in Korea and takes it over by force. It wasn't like that. But that said, it certainly wasn't a democratic process, and it certainly was a process that Japan will put a lot of energy into exercising that way. And a lot of Japanese say, well, if they hadn't done it, then Russia would have done it, and it was kind of Russia and Japan were competing. That doesn't mean that it was okay to take over Korea. But it's an interesting topic, the annexation of Korea. But the fact that your wife doesn't even know that there was an invasion, I guess, is kind of disturbing. So I'm sorry about that. Scrolling down, I'm going to wrap this up in a little bit, but where do we go? Hey guys, someone asking for subs. Yeah, it's tough nowadays to promote channels, isn't it? It's used to be able to just do a video response and it would be there, but yeah, Jacob Thompson, sorry to hear that you get hay fever all year round. I used to get it all year round in New Zealand. I hardly get it in Japan, but I do get it for a month or two right now. So I've got some eye drops and some stuff which helps me through. It's not so bad though. I used to get it much worse. The lack of nature in Tokyo, I think, helps me. Another question from Ramsey. Is English the only foreign language that you'd be able to speak, that you'd be able to learn at school? Is Korean being taught? Where here is, for example, you can learn French, Dutch, English, German, by the time you finish secondary school. Good question. In secondary school, makes sense. I'm sure that you can learn Korean in lots of places. Korean is a very similar language to Japanese, actually, and it's a very easy language. I mean, what's probably most challenging about Korean language is the grammar and the Confucian cultural aspects of it, which are frankly pretty similar to Japan. The writing system is very, very easy. The fact that you don't have to learn the kind of odd grammar because it's the same as Japanese makes it a very easy subject for Japanese people, although I know that there's some political sensitivity around that. I don't know about high school. I know that Chinese is becoming a very popular subject, as it should be. And certainly I think for people post-high school, French and Spanish are still reasonably popular subjects. And a lot of immigrants from those countries, a lot of people who I think you can go to an Eikaiwa school and there'll be like a Spanish class once a week or something for people who are interested. And I've met lots of Japanese, for example, through a French rugby club who speak French. So people seem to learn it. I don't know about high school so much, certainly not in every school, but I think, of course, you can learn other languages. German is very big. The Japanese legal system, the civil code is based on the Prussian civil code. It's basically still, even today, very, very similar to the German legal system. So if you want to study law, it's a bit like studying Latin. So when you do law in America or Britain, a lot of terms are Latin terms. In Japanese, you learn German terms so that you can understand the underlying law. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, so Netherlands or Belgium would make sense. I'm trying to remember where you're from, actually. I think you mentioned you're in Belgium or something before, right? It is getting on to 11:30, so I'm going to wrap up soon. But thank you all for joining me. This is fun. I'm sorry I'm a little bit blocked up today, and I don't really have anything particularly prepared. Quick thing I'll show you. I did record the unboxing of this, but I haven't really had time to post it. I got my iPad mini, and it is awesome. So, I mean, the Retina display is just superb, and the fact that I can put it into a little light notebook like this. The thing about the old iPad is that it was heavy to put in my bag, to add that to my bag to take to work. This is just nothing. And it's got the same screen resolution as a full iPad. And I got the 28 gigabyte version, so I can put all the movies and music and everything I want to put into it and forget about it. Love this, love this, love this. So lots of cool new toys lately. I'm looking forward to going to Australia at the end of the year, going to Queensland. That'll be good. Congratulations to the Australian Rugby League team that basically handed New Zealand its ass in the Rugby League World Cup final yesterday. It's a little bit of a shame. Rugby league is a fantastic sport. It's not well known outside of Great Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. It would be better, but it's just so dominated by so few countries. Occasionally we can grab a win off Australia, but of course Australia is so dominant of that sport. I mean, they could put in Queensland and New South Wales, the two state of origin teams, and they probably would have been in the final. There was such a gap after that whole tournament between however many countries for there to be such a gap in the final. And for it to be such a non-contest, it was actually, I was watching it live and it was boring. I actually turned on South Park, the most recent South Park, or that you could see on the South Park site on the internet, about Taming the Strange. that was the best South Park episode in a while. Go and check that out. It partly relates to my work. They're talking about failed IT systems. So the topic kind of was interesting. I thought the stuff about, I love the way that they use the word strange. So very enjoyable. Hope everyone is well. Hope you're having a good year. See you on Wednesday. Going to do another 2.5 Oyajis with Victor, 10:30 Wednesday, as we always do. Then back here again, 10:30 next Sunday, for another one of these. Good chatting with you. I'm going to do one more refresh and then I'm going to log out. But good talking to you all. So what did we talk about tonight? I guess we got through fashion. Somehow we got through fashion. We got through textbooks. We got through invasion of Korea. Ooh, I'm going to get in trouble for that. I'm not even going to put that. I said that in the title. But devil advocates are saying there's no difference Nazi war criminals being arrested nowadays since they detained the American. That's a good question. L.A. Chat King asking, what's my opinion of the 85-year-old American detained in North Korea? What do I think of that? Don't get me started on North Korea. Of course it's bullshit. They get an 85-year-old Korean war veteran a tourist who goes to go and see North Korea, and he's boarding the plane to leave after a full trip there. And they pull him off the plane, they detain him at a few however long later, I mean, it took after coming out, after disappearing for a time, he confesses to war crimes against North Korea 5 decades ago. North Korea is, of course, famous because for having taken detained prisoner of war pilots and putting them in Chinese custody, and they disappeared for many, many weeks, and they came out and they confessed to, for example, having dropped biological weapons and chemical weapons on Korean civilians, and saying it was a deliberate part of the US strategy. And they were so convincing when they said it that the US actually went and checked through the chain of command, did anyone authorize this? Because they believed the confessions themselves. It's a sad and unfortunate part of, I don't know if you'd say it's the culture, but they certainly have a track record. The communists in North Korea and in China have this very impressive track record for coercing and brainwashing people in their detentions through very now well and better understood means. They know how to deprive people of sleep and use certain techniques that can make people confess to anything. So I think they got this 85-year-old American tourist, and I think they tortured him for 2 weeks, and they brainwashed him, and they either made him desperate enough to admit to a confession that he didn't do, or they actually they could have even been so successful that they actually made him believe it, and he could come home still believing that he's now done these things. The chances of someone who actually did those things going there, arrest, like a Nazi war criminal thing, I would say is less than 5% chance. North Korea's got a long history of this, and this is for domestic propaganda purposes, that they caught a war criminal, that they've caught an American, and it's disgusting. It's horrible. And the North Korea's a lot of defenders in Japan among Japanese people. A lot of Japanese people from the far left in Japan and big North Korea fans, and they defended. This is exactly. I mean, this just shows they are the bottom of the barrel of humanity, that they do this kind of thing. And I have friends who have traveled, American friends who have traveled to North Korea as tourists. And it's kind of an exciting thing to go to North Korea. And I've always thought it would be cool to go to North Korea just to bear witness to the final Stalinist dictatorship on Earth. But the idea that you're not really in any danger going there as a tourist, this goes to show once again, this has happened. There have been South Korean tourists, and there have been people get detained there for nothing sometimes. They just decide they're going to detain someone. And this poor old 85-year-old guy, I'm almost certain that the guy's been tortured. Indeed, as this other human rights guy who's also been detained there. Just a horrible, horrible thing. So that's what I think about that. And that is the final thing I'm going to say for the night. So Chris, Yeriaztian, my Armenian friend from France, I keep thinking Switzerland, good to see you. Queensland, lovely, it is a lovely place, it's a great place to spend Christmas. Good to see you all. See you all next week. Peace. Let's flash this again. 11:35. I love that, it's such a cool watch. Okay, peace.